Welcome in. It is Big Ten today. Great to have you with us on this Thursday. Dave Revs and Jake Butt preparing to head out to State College.
Oh, yeah. First time calling a game in that booth. I would, when we'd play, we'd stay off campus, we'd bus in and bus out.
Yeah.
So I can't wait to see it from that perspective.
It is a great scene, no doubt, at Beaver Stadium, and looking forward to picking your brain on that one. But before you go, we're going to pick your brain on everything.
Please.
Frankly. So
I'd love to get in.
Let's dive into it. It is our big story. It is the weekend ahead. The Big Ten's top three teams continue to impress, all in the top six nationally, all dominating. 16-0, 15 of the wins by double-figure margins. They're outscoring their opponents by an average of nearly 29 points per game. All three in action this week. Let's hear from the coaches, starting with Jim Harbaugh.
Don't really pay too much attention to, if it's being said good or, said bad. I mean, those are, it's just really about us. The only antidote for any of those kind of things are good or bad. Leadership and character, that unyielding commitment to the basics and the fundamentals of Michigan football.
We're just in a constant grind to get better and to improve in all these different areas. And, we know, our first goal was to win the first game, then, win the next 10 and then win the rivalry game. And, we have these goals. And so we knew this was going to be a long stretch. We talked about it during the bye week, and you got to bring it every week. That's, part of the deal. When you come to Ohio State, you're not allowed to have a bad day.
We want to have the ability to run or pass in any game and in any given situation. That's kind of how we view balance. And we want to continue to build on that. This game could look very different depending on how they decide to defend us. We could throw it 50 times or we could rush it 50 times. And that's who we want to be offensively. We want to have the ability to do what we need to do to win and manage the game.
I'm going to dive into each one of these top teams with you, Jake, and we'll approach it this way. Curious which unit has impressed you the most for each team. Let's start with Michigan. Where would you go with the Wolverines?
I have a confession to make.
Yes.
We love talking quarterbacks. We love showing the highlights of the skill position. I have a crush, if you would like to say, on good trench play.
Well, I understand why. That was a little bit of what your career was about.
A little bit.
Yeah.
I'm a good bridge between
Part
the
of it,
two.
yes.
But I went back. I was watching some of the tape last week of Minnesota at Michigan, and I confirmed my group here, which is the defensive line for Michigan. We'll talk about the trenches as a whole, but the group that has stood out this whole season for Michigan is the D-line. The interior guys, they're 6 deep. I mean, they have 6 starters. The edge players, they're 4 or 5 deep. Guys that when they rotate, there's no drop-off. The defense as a whole is good, but you don't necessarily need to see the back end of the defense because most teams just meet the brick wall that is that defensive line, right? It is unbelievable how they continue to rotate guys through. It is so tough to run against them. Joel Klatt, our friend, calls them like a boa constrictor.
Yes.
Suffocating. So the D-line stood out. I still would give credit to the offensive line as well. Throughout the season, you have 5 starters, but you rotate guys, right? And a few weeks ago, they put the left tackle, Ladarius Henderson. He was kind of starting the season coming off the bench. Now he's been starting. They moved Carson Barnhart over to the right tackle. And you can see the O-line all of a sudden has been completely on the same page, and that extends out to the tight ends and the running backs. We call them MAs, missed assignments, where you have 2 guys blocking one, and that means 1 guy's running free. Right. The past 2 weeks, that has not happened. And you can see JJ, when you look at the film, pointing things out. These guys are all on the same page, so the O-line has stepped up. But if I had to give a group, the D-line has been more consistent for Michigan throughout the season.
It's amazing. You look through some of the accomplishments of this group. They have yet to defend a goal-to-go situation the entire year.
It's crazy.
It's nuts.
Yeah.
No one has been in that spot against them. There have only been 8 drives that have entered the red zone against them. Only one of those resulted in a touchdown. It is amazing. Again, like you said, there's lots of incredible units on this team. I mean, the offensive line, they've given up the fewest tackles for loss in the country. Obviously, JJ is playing at an incredible level. You can go on and on, but
Right.
but man, that defense has been stifled.
I'd love to see a goal-to-go situation because that means more bigger bodies. Just 300-plus pounds across the board.
I want to approach the game this weekend a little bit differently than we might. I don't think there's a great argument to be made that this is going to be a particularly competitive game. Now, we've been proven wrong at times through the years, but Michigan has absolutely dominated Indiana. So I guess I want to put it to you this way. What could be most interesting in this game, even if it isn't necessarily something that impacts the result or impacts who wins the game?
Well, I mean, real quick, Indiana's got a new offensive coordinator, so you can't install a brand new offense in season, but sometimes just a fresh face and maybe a few wrinkles can instill a little bit of hope into the team. Look, I played Indiana throughout my career, and it was always a game that was scary. Why was it scary? Because they played so hard. Toughness is the answer to your question, though. Remember that game week 1 against Ohio State?
Yep.
That's a tough Indiana football team.
Right.
The defense is tough. They don't blink. They don't shy away from the challenges. And I say that because that is fully within Indiana's control. They can decide as a defensive unit or an offensive unit to show up for 60 minutes and play absolutely as hard as they possibly can. Even if you aren't right, you can still play hard. So for Indiana, that's something that a team could always build off of. If you're playing hard, if you're giving it all, you'll show up to the film session regardless of the result and say, you know what, we can win with guys that leave it on the field.
And to your point, they did that against Ohio State. I mean, they only gave up 23 points. They were certainly very impressive defensively. It just feels like it's fallen off here. You wonder whether the bye week will help them. You mentioned new offensive coordinator in Rod Carey. Again, they haven't won in Ann Arbor since 1967. So it's a stretch to think that might happen given how good Michigan is and given the struggles Indiana's had. But to your point, you can make a competitive game and you can play a tough game. And again, that is what they did against Ohio State. So let's turn the page and focus on the Buckeyes. Okay. What has been their best unit to this point?
So just when you think about this question, what you know clearly who the best unit is when a team's back is against the wall. So let's think about the Notre Dame final drive. The best unit was the wide receiver group, right? And of course, you got two of the best, if not number 1, number 2 receiver in college football in Marvin Harrison Jr. and Emeka Egbuka. So to me, it's the receiver group, and it was the Notre Dame game. It was Maryland last week. I called their game against Western Kentucky week 2 after the Indiana game.
Right.
And what'd they do? They came out and put those guys on the same side of the field and schemed up routes. When Ohio State's back is against the wall, they lean on those guys. The defense certainly as a whole has a case, but the quality of talent, and they even go 3, 4, 5 guys deep in that room, but those two in particular just absolutely stand out.
Defense has been great too, as you say, but I mean, offensively, there's been a lot of hand-wringing. They're first in the Big Ten in total offense. Kyle McCord is second in passing efficiency.
That crazy?
Yeah, I mean, it's not as if this is an ineffective offense. Again, they did not run the ball well last week. They haven't run it well at times, and maybe that puts a little more pressure on the QB and the wide receiver. As for the matchup this week, I mean, I get that, you know, you look at Purdue and they've struggled some defensively and turnovers have been an issue for them, but this is right in their wheelhouse. Historically, I mean, you talk about teams that pull upsets, teams that win games you don't expect them to win. Purdue is the one, I think, in our conference you think about the most. Mm-hmm. So what could be most interesting in this game, Boilermakers and Buckeyes, particularly when you think about Ohio State in the game they have looming next week against Penn State?
The Spoilermakers, right? This is what they do. The making of an upset, what you need to do is you need to start fast. You need to force the team that's better on paper to make errors, and you limit your own errors. So when it comes to forcing Ohio State to make errors, I look at the defensive front, the structure of Purdue, and what Ryan Walters wants it to be. Is it a 3-4? Is it a 5 down? We've asked him. He doesn't want to define it. The point is you have 5 guys across the line of scrimmage that are all attacking downhill. Those linebackers and the safeties, their first motion is downhill. As good as the Ohio State skill position has been, the room for improvement for the Buckeyes is across their offensive line. So that's the matchup to look out for. You have 5 guys on the line of scrimmage for 5 offensive linemen. You need to have excellent communication, excellent identification as the front moves. Everyone needs to be on the same page. For them, this is a week where you got to be a little bit more balanced. Meet this challenge against Purdue, because of course Penn State's next week. You don't want to look over them, but that D-line is in another level. It's on the O-line, the tight ends, the fullbacks, the running backs, everyone to take a big step forward and have a dominant run blocking performance.
And to your point, Penn State's defensive front has been great, but the defensive front that actually leads the Big Ten in tackles for loss, that is Purdue. I mean, they're causing a lot of havoc. And again, you keep coming back to, you use the term spoiler makers, right?
Yeah.
17 wins against top 5 teams in their history when unranked. It is the most of any program. We have seen them do that. We have seen them do it against Ohio State. It wasn't too long ago.
That becomes your identity.
Right.
Okay, so Ohio State knows that. Purdue knows that. So there's this very early period in the game, the first 6 or 7 minutes, where if you can hang around and you make some plays for Purdue, you confirm your belief that you've established. And Ohio State says, oh, shoot, here we are in a dogfight. Yes. Those first 7 minutes are critical.
Let's finish up with the team you're going to see, Penn State, the unit that has impressed you the most.
Defensive line. And I'm looking at the names. Okay, Chop Robinson, right? Abdul Carter, Adisa Isaac, Dennis Sutton, Curtis Jacobs. I'm leaving off guys because they're nameless, faceless at this point. It's a new guy every play. Sometimes it's 2 or 3 guys every play in the backfield. And look, the secondary, I could make a case for how good they are. I mean, the film says when they have the opportunities, they are in position and they make the plays. But we don't get to see that as much because the D-line is in the quarterback's lap or tackling the running back in the backfield within a second or two. They're so fun to watch. They play with such violence and speed. At defensive line, man, they present so many challenges to teams.
Manny Diaz has done an amazing job in his year plus there. Last time we saw them, of course, they were terrorizing Northwestern. 7 sacks, 12 tackles for loss in that game. UMass, let's just be honest here, does not figure to provide a whole lot of resistance. This is one of the worst teams in FBS. That being said, there's always things that are interesting within the course of a game. So where is this game potentially most interesting?
Okay, so you laid it out perfectly. UMass has struggled defensively. They've given up a bunch of explosive plays on the ground, in the air. That just doesn't mean Penn State's going to have explosives. All it means is you should feel good about your scheme. If this is the week for Penn State, you should go in and say, we got to start cracking open the run game a little bit. We have to have some explosives in the pass game. This is the weakest opponent that we've played in terms of giving that up. I played for Don Brown. He was our defensive coordinator at Michigan. He's the head coach now at UMass. He had a saying. He said, we solve our problems with aggression. And he had the mustache and that thick accent.
It doesn't seem to be working at UMass.
Well,
it worked in his first time there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What happens is when you're aggressive, you have to, there's 11 guys it's a zero-sum game. When you are aggressive, you have to take away from your insurance in the back end, right? So that's where these explosives happen. Again, it's a good opportunity for Penn State to handle that aggression. And if you can break through that initial line of scrimmage, the explosives will come.
Right, and again, the numbers tell the story here. Penn State, we've talked about it a lot. They have the fewest plays of 20 yards or longer in the Big Ten, which is kind of staggering because this is a team that had a lot of explosion a year ago.
They're absolutely capable.
UMass has given up the most plays of 20 yards or longer in the country, and frankly, it's not even close.
Yeah.
So if you can't figure out a way to get big plays here, maybe what that tells us is you don't have that this year. Now, there are other ways to win. As you well know, right? I mean, you have a great defense. You can grind it out, all of that kind of stuff. But if there is explosion within this Penn State team, this would be a good week for it to manifest.
It's not the end of the world if you don't have explosion.
Absolutely.
I know they're capable. I've seen it with
saw
my
last
eyes,
year
right?
with the
Those
same
backs
guys.
can do it.
Yes.
Absolutely, right? But it's not the end of the world because if you can, they're dominating time of possession too. Because they're extending drives and they're keeping that defense off the field. But really, when you play Ohio State, when you play Michigan, it is such a luxury to be able to crack off a 30, 40-yard play. You don't have to methodically drive the ball down the field and score all the time. So this is the week to prove to yourself, all right, guys, we can do it, right? That's the vulnerability in UMass's defense.
And haven't done it in the run game or the pass game. Haven't taken a lot of shots downfield. We'll see if maybe you do a little bit of that this week as well. Joel Klatt's top 10 this week, shaping up this way. Remember, he had Michigan number 1 a week ago. He now has them second as Georgia regained the top spot. Interesting to see how he orders the top 3 in the Big Ten. A week ago, he had Ohio State ahead of Penn State. Now he has the Nittany Lions in front of the Bucks. Pleased to be joined now, as we are every week, by Joel Klatt. He is, of course, Fox Sports' lead game analyst, and you can catch him on the Joel Klatt Show podcast, wherever it is you get your pods. Joel, I need to ask you this question right off the top. I know you got Michigan this week against Indiana. They're the number 2 team in your rankings. The Wolverines are. Last week on this show, you compared them to a boa constrictor.
Yeah.
After Minnesota played Michigan last week, P.J. Fleck, in his post-game comments, compared them to a boa constrictor. So I just need to ask you, are the two of you sharing notes at this point? What's going on here?
Well, if we get called in front of the teacher, I will just very clearly say I said it first. So listen, I don't know if he's watching the podcast, which is where I said it, listen to it, or this program, probably with it on in the facility. I just think it's such an accurate description of what Michigan is. To be honest with you, this is such a deep team that is really good in every area. And because of that, they constrict your ability to do anything. And they're great at the line of scrimmage. And then I think more specifically, and he touched on this in his postgame comments after that loss to the Wolverines, he said that this team knows how they win philosophically, and they play to that style. Every area of that team complements every other area of that team. They're also incredibly disciplined. I think they've had 1 penalty in the last 2 games. Yeah. This is a difficult team to beat. And PJ's words, coaches don't generally say, not the boa constrictor thing. He led off with, that's the best team I've seen since I've been here. Coaches don't generally say that unless they feel strongly about it. And so I think all of us should really pay attention to the way PJ talked about Michigan and then what Michigan has moving forward. This is, I do believe at this point in the season, the best Michigan team that I've covered.
Yeah. Okay, so you have them number 2 this week. You've got Georgia number 1. They were awfully impressive against Kentucky in a game I think a lot of us were interested to see, and how well would they play, and might this be the time that Kentucky gets a team of that caliber? It clearly didn't happen. You had Oklahoma, which won against Texas, a Texas team that I know a lot of people had thought, hey, maybe they could end up being number 1. How close are all those teams together at the top there? Is there a line of demarcation where you kind of cut it off?
It's a great question. I actually think, earlier in the season, I think we even had this conversation, if I'm not mistaken, Rev. I thought that the line was down there 9, 10, 11 teams. I thought, okay, there's 9, 10, 11 really legitimate national title contenders. But as the season plays out, that line is going to move up. Last week was the first time all season, at least for me, where that line looked like it was just 2 teams. I thought Michigan and Georgia separated themselves out. They played so well and so dominant. And so while all these other teams have shown, some weaknesses at points or even gotten beat, here are these 2 teams that we knew were going to be good coming into the year. They're deeper. They're better at the line of scrimmage. And specifically for the Georgia reference, I know that they hadn't played well against South Carolina or even Auburn on the road, but I will tell you, I watched Usain Bolt run, and he wasn't great out of the blocks, and he knew he was going to win the race, but boy, in the middle of the race, you would just see it, and you'd be like, oh my gosh, he's hitting a gear that nobody else has. That might be what we saw from Georgia last week against Kentucky. People questioning them, they get a good team in their building, and they're like, okay, tell you what, welcome him in, lock the gates behind him, and let's see what we got.
I do want to ask you about Ohio State and Penn State. They're going to play next week, big noon. It's a heavily anticipated game.
Yeah.
They both have games, obviously, this week, Ohio State against Purdue and Penn State against UMass. You saw Ohio State last week. They kind of sleepwalked through that first half and then played pretty well in the second half against Maryland, shut them down. Defense really played well. You still have Penn State a notch above Ohio State, though, in your rankings. Why do you order them in that way?
Well, I think that you could watch the Ohio State game from a week ago against Maryland 2 very different ways. You can be a glass half full or glass half empty in terms of Ohio State. You can either tell yourself, hey, that was an undefeated Big Ten team, probably the 4th best team in the Big Ten, and you beat them by 20. Or you can look at it and you say the score might not have been indicative of the game that I watched. It might have been a closer game than what the final score indicated. And there are clear warning signs on the dashboard, a check engine light, and specifically when it comes to the offensive line for Ohio State. I probably fall more into that camp. Dave, that offensive line has to play better, Because it's not like Maryland's defensive front seven has been world beaters thus far. In fact, the weakness of that defense was defending the run. And even though Travion Henderson wasn't on the field, I don't think his absence was the problem with the Ohio State run game. The offensive line has got to move double teams. They've got to get to the second level and get linebackers blocked. And if they don't, they're going to have massive problems moving the football, which they did in the first half. The thing that you've got to rest your hat on if you're Ohio State and really take solace in is the fact that a young quarterback, 2 weeks after he did it against Notre Dame, he was asked to again be the reason that they were moving the football, and he was able to do it even after a slow start. Helps when you've got marvelous Marvin Harrison on the outside, certainly, but they did not have an ability to run the ball, and that to me is at least some cause for concern.
No doubt. And Ryan Day was asked about it this week, and someone said, "Are you going to make changes on the line?" He's like, "No, it's the best group we got. They just need to get better." Which feels like it's a compelling reason not to make changes, but it also makes you wonder if they can't run the ball against Maryland, are they going to be able to run it against Penn State and Michigan, who have elite defenses this year? Hey, I do want to ask you, before we let you go, it's not a Big Ten game this year. It's going to be a Big Ten game next year, Oregon and Washington. So there is a lot of interest in it in Big Ten country this week. A top 10 battle, first time they've ever met with both in the top 10. What do you think sways the balance in that one?
I think home field sways the balance. You and I have both been in buildings where there's this much anticipation. That's a great fan base and a place that's actually really difficult to play. And I don't think many people outside of the Pacific Northwest understand that. We all know that Autzen can get loud. Husky Stadium can get very loud. I think that's where this game is going to be won and lost. You see that environment. I think it's going to be incredibly difficult for Oregon to play efficient football, and that's really the name of their game. That I wouldn't say that they are, and this is going to sound like a knock, but it's not meant to be. They're really balanced and very good. I don't think that they're excellent in any area where they can go overcome some of those, in particular the environment. So for me, location of the game, Michael Penix, if he's in rhythm, he gets McMillan back on the outside, one of their wide receivers. This is going to be a fantastic game. This game is every bit as big and as meaningful as what we'll have next week in the shoe. These two teams, the winner of this game in Husky Stadium is a legit national championship contender and certainly the team that's going to be in best position to represent the Pac-12 in the Pac-12 championship game.
No doubt. Some compelling action out west. And of course, one of those games involves a West Coast team coming to the Midwest as well this week with USC and Notre Dame. But a lot of good stuff in the Pac-12 this week. Looking forward to the big noon game as well, Michigan and Indiana. Have a great call, Joel, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thanks, bud. Have a good day.
Sunday, a record-breaking crowd expected when Caitlin Clark leads defending national runner-up Iowa into an exhibition game against DePaul in the crossover at Kinnick, presented by State Farm. It's Sunday, 3 Eastern, only on the Big Ten Network and the Fox Sports app. Tons of anticipation for this one among the Hawkeyes.
We're going to have 50,000 people there. We're going to play in front of more fans than any women's team has ever played in front of. And so it's really special that we get to work at a university that embraces this, that thinks outside of the box, and that wants to do something special.
50,000 people, that's basically 3 Carver Hawkeye arenas, more than that. And hopefully ticket numbers continue to grow as we approach Sunday. But also all the proceeds are going to the Children's Hospital, which is a big part of our university. And, you know, student athletes always go over there and interact with the kids that are over there. So I think it's a really special experience, but also for a really great cause. So, you know, go out there and play good basketball, but also enjoy it because, like we said, it's a historic moment.
Here's a look at this weekend's football action. We've already touched on the matchups for the Wolverines, Buckeyes, and Nittany Lions. Michigan and Rutgers is our early game on the network. Illinois going to Maryland. And the latest kick of the day is actually 4 Eastern time. Iowa and Wisconsin on Fox, a game with huge Big Ten West title implications. Interested in what you'll be watching in this one, Jake. And let's break it down, starting when Wisconsin has the ball.
Before we do it, I want to hit you one thing.
Okay, hit me.
Did you check the weather for the game this weekend?
I have not.
Okay.
I'm guessing rainy, though, because it's going to be
80% chance of rain.
Yeah.
15 to 25 mile per hour winds.
Okay.
It's a factor. Because when Wisconsin has the ball, I mean, the one thing you know, we all know, everyone knows.
I know only one thing.
That
Tell me what that thing is.
Iowa wins by taking the ball away.
That they do.
Okay, so we start there, and what that means to me is before we get to Tanner Mordecai, I'm looking at Braylon Allen because look, he's a special talent. He is, at his best, he's one of the best, in college football. But I feel consistently there's room for improvement for him. There's room for him to just have a dominant game in the biggest moment, and that is this week for a few reasons. One, because understanding the turnovers can cost you. You want to put Tanner Mordecai in third and manageable situations. Even better, you'd like to avoid third down altogether. That's on Braylon Allen. And then when you get to Tanner Mordecai, here's just one interesting thing. In his 2 Big Ten games, he's run the ball 11 and 14 times.
Yeah.
So they've leaned on him running the ball as well. Have to have ball security. And for him, I would say, where is number 3 on Iowa's defense? Where's Cooper DeJean?
Right.
I would say think very carefully before you throw it in his direction. A punt is a very good thing in this game.
That's what is really interesting to me is you don't think about Wisconsin as a team that makes a whole lot of turnover mistakes, but it has been the case this year, particularly early on in the year. And Iowa, they're the team, of course, that causes a ton of turnovers. Early in the year they weren't, but man, these last 2 weeks they have really cranked it up. And as we've seen them struggle on offense, and we'll get to that, it feels to me like if Wisconsin figures out a way to get through this game, not turning the ball over, Iowa's going to be really hard-pressed to win the game.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's why I kind of even highlight the conditions because that can be a sloppy game, which means turnovers. It also affects special teams. I mean, Wisconsin has 5 fumbles on the season given away. Right, and then you throw in some interceptions. They're good for a turnover a game at this point. If you can leave this game with 0 turnovers, I think you're saying, man, we feel really good about our chances for the Badgers.
All right, what about from Iowa's point of view when they have the ball? And again, we know how much the offense has struggled. I will say, though, last week, I get that the passing game was dreadful. And it's going to have to be better, and I'll be interested in your thoughts on that. But they ran the ball effectively last week, and the variable there was they got Caleb Johnson back.
Right.
He had a great year last year as a freshman. He had been injured for a few weeks. That looked like a different run game. It looked like not a great pass game, but it looked like a different run game a week ago.
He's special. And again, the conditions, both teams are going to have to run the ball. He's special, and he's special in the sense that what you saw last week is when there's a crease, he's got that home run ability, and he's not afraid to hit it, and he runs with some inertia and momentum up through the hole. So if you're Wisconsin's or Iowa's offensive line, you can't get tired with the 2 or 3 or 4 yard runs. You just trust that eventually your talented running back in Caleb Johnson is going to break one open, and that could be the difference in this game. As far as the pass game goes, no receivers caught a ball last week, right? It was Eric All, and it was all really tight ends and running. Not a single receiver caught the ball.
All caught all but one of the passes, right?
Yes.
There was one to a running back. The rest were all there. I mean, there's only 6 completions.
I love tight end catches as much as anybody in the world.
I'm guessing there's a but here.
But there's been some drops. Like, it's not all on Deacon Hill. There's been some drops. And I know I know these guys know this, that the margin for error offensively right now is very close to 0, right? They just don't have the talent and the identity to kind of mess around and flirt the line of average, right? The easy plays have to be made. And then some of the more challenging plays, you'd like to, instead of being a 0% or a 5%, you'd like to make about 30% of those plays, right? That if you say with the way this team plays defense and the way this team plays special teams, you feel really good about the chance you're starting to play complementary football. Just to sum this up, back to the tight end, why tight ends are important. Proximity to the football. You're an extension of the offensive line, so your routes aren't outside the numbers. The hashes don't affect you as much. So when there's rainy conditions and when your quarterback is struggling to throw it accurately down the field, the checkdowns, which is what we saw with the running backs, and the tight ends, you're just closer to the ball. They're easier throws.
And I get all that. I mean, I am guessing that you believe that there's no absolutes with Iowa. So let me preface what I'm about to say by saying they have figured out a formula that works really, really well for them. However, at some point, right, you have to threaten the defense with your wide receivers. I mean, otherwise you're so in a phone booth at that point. So I get what you're saying. Eric All, close to the line of scrimmage, running back, catch passes. Do you disagree? I mean, can you – I'm not saying can you win every game with 0 completions to wide receivers, but can you win it with 3 completions to wide receivers? Like, where is the Where's the threshold of where you have to threaten a defense a little bit with those guys?
Well, you have to, just for no other reason other than you have to communicate to your opponent we're willing to do this. Like if you're in one-on-one coverage as a defense, you never feel good regardless of who you're playing. If a quarterback has protection and he's on a big-time play action, he's chucking it down the field. So many things can happen. If it's not a completion, that's where pass interferences happen. That big plays come off of that. So it doesn't have to be your identity. It's not going to be their identity, but you do have to put this on tape just to show we're willing to do it. And honestly, sometimes for a quarterback that's struggling, it's a little bit easier to get into big time play action, max protection, and you're running 2 routes and just say, hey, just launch this. Just launch this, because again, that's where the big plays happen, but pass interferences happen on those deep throws as well. You got to just say we're willing to do it.
Interesting. What about Wisconsin's defense? What's your take on this group that did not seem great at the beginning of the year, didn't seem up to their standard, which is very high? These last couple of weeks, it feels like it's been better and really starting to force turnovers.
Absolutely. I mean, they returned a lot of starters, but they lost some key players. Nick Herbig and Keanu Benton, right? Those are big-time players that are doing well at the next level. So you return production, but you lose the star power. You also have you go from Jim Leonard, very familiar, to Luke Fickell and Coach Tressel. It's a bit of a new scheme, right? So what you're seeing is progress week over week, just a little bit more familiarity with the scheme, a little bit more familiarity with one another. They've gotten better each week. And again, this is a matchup you feel good for Wisconsin. Like, guys, like if we can play sound fundamental defense, we will make it very hard on Iowa to drive the ball down the field. You do load the box off the conversation we just said. You do as a safety, you're more willing to be downhill. As linebackers, you're more willing to make those first 2 steps downhill to ensure Caleb Johnson. You want to make it as hard on him as possible.
2 really good defensive pedigrees in this game. Yeah. And it feels like ultimately who can make that play on defense that turns the tide might be the team that comes away with the win. Yeah?
And Iowa special teams are elite.
They're special.
Be the difference.
Yeah.
They are special. Yeah. Yes, exactly.
Saturday, we are all Big Ten all morning long. In-depth previews of every matchup and tons of homecoming fun from Rutgers. Big Ten Tailgate presented by Defenders. Saturday, 10 a.m. Eastern only on the Big Ten Network and the Fox Sports app. The Scarlet Knights, of course, hosting Michigan State. Rutgers 4-0 at home. How do you assess what is a very big game for both these teams?
Oh, yeah. Well, I just want to look at it from the Rutgers point of view because Schiano was asked, hey, is this a must-win game for you this week? Understanding the schedule that they have ahead. And he gave the right answer. Every game's a must-win. We're going to leave it all on the table for sure, right? But I think, so when you look at who Rutgers has, you got Michigan State, you got Indiana, and then you got some really tough challenges in those last few weeks, right? So these next 2 weeks are the probably your best chances to get to 6. Why I think, yes, this is a must-win game is because, you have your base game plan, but then you can build in some gadget plays, right? You can build in some trick plays, some stuff that you may not use against a team that you don't feel is your best chance to win.
Right.
So in the context of what we just talked about, this schedule, this game, say your defense forces a turnover, you're in plus territory down in the red zone. Maybe that's the time to use the gadget play. Maybe this is the time to open everything up to try to get to 5 wins, understanding you had a good chance next week going into the bye.
It's interesting, too. I mean, from Michigan State's point of view, and I understand in a lot of ways it's such a weird year for Michigan State that I'm not sure the fans are looking at getting to a bowl in the same way that Rutgers fans are looking at it. It's such a transition year for the Spartans. But if they're going to get to a bowl game, if they don't win this game,
there you go.
Then you need to beat either Michigan or Penn State or Ohio State to figure out a way to get to a bowl. So I think it's really big from both perspectives. I understand emphasizing it more from Rutgers' point of view because I get you're trying to show progress and a bowl game would be huge for them. But I think it's big for both sides in this game. So an interesting one there.
We'll see who the quarterback is, right?
Yes.
We're doing the old,
how about
Holland
Barnett? We have a plan. I'm excited about the plan. I'm not going to reveal the plan.
I'm doing my Bill Belichick. All right, so we'll see who the quarterback is, but that's a good Rutgers defense, so the run game's going to have to step up as well.
Okay, what about Maryland and Illinois? Okay. Maryland trying to get back on track after last week. Man, it was a game that even though the final score got away from them a little bit, they certainly had opportunities to win that game against Ohio State.
Yeah.
I got Illinois coming to town. The Illini have been struggling mightily trying to get back on track here as they try not to let a bowl game escape their grasp really early in the year. What are you watching here?
Looking at Maryland, and I'm saying this is your chance to separate from the pack, right? There's Ohio State, there's Michigan, there's Penn State. And then it's a little bit cloudy beyond that, but you certainly feel you have the case to be the next in line.
Right.
So if that's going to be the case, then you have to win all the winnable games. Like this week is a game you should win. Illinois turns the ball over as much as anyone. That's great for Maryland's defense. So in order to separate from the pack, if I was looking at the end of this game for Maryland, I would say I would rather lose by win by a tighter margin, but clean up some of the turnovers for Talia, clean up some of the throws, focus on clock management, do the right thing. I would rather sacrifice a big, wide margin of victory to play a tighter, cleaner game to show improvement that's going to allow your team to compete with Michigan and Penn State and win out the rest of your schedule.
How do you explain what's going on with Illinois?
How do you explain what's going on to Illinois?
I don't know. I was hoping you'd have the explanation.
Well, I mean, listen, it's the same story every week, and there's an old saying of more games are lost than won, and I think that's where Illinois is at this point. I think you're asking Altmaier to be something he's not, right? I think he'd be a nice complementary piece if you could run the ball. Now, he's responsible for some of those interceptions, but right now, I really, if I was Illinois, I would not be focused on having like the best game of your season. I would just focus on stop turning the ball over. The penalties, right? Just if you can come out of this game and say, wow, we threw the ball away on third down. Hey, we avoided some of the penalties. We punted it. Again, like you stop this downward momentum, at least pause it and give you something to go back in the right direction.
I cannot figure out the lines of scrimmage.
Which is shocking.
Yes.
Which is shocking. Particularly, I thought Johnny Newton was the best defensive lineman in all college football. Still could be, but that's Brett Bielema's. That's what he's good at.
Yeah, that's his bread and butter for sure. All right, have a safe trip to State College. Looking forward to the call on Saturday, and looking forward to having you join us tomorrow. Jerry DiNardo and Nicole Auer back with me.